Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 2 to 5 player game Carcassonne Hunters and Gatherers, designed by Klaus-Jürgen Wrede and Bernd Brunhofer and published by Z-Man Games, who helped sponsor this video. Maybe you've played the original game of Carcassonne, where you construct roads, farms, and cities. But here, you'll be going back to prehistoric times where you'll fish and hunt for food among mammoths and saber-toothed tigers trying to outwit the other tribes. But whether you're a veteran of the original or this is your first Carcassonne game, join me at the table and let's learn how to play. To set up, find and separate all of these land tiles by their backs. You'll have a starting tile marked with a brown C, 78 regular tiles marked with white Cs, and 16 menhir tiles showing this back. Set the starting tile face up in the center of the play area, and then shuffle and stack the regular backed and menhir tiles separately nearby. And you can feel free to break the regular tiles up into smaller stacks and spread them around the table so players can more easily reach them. Also put the scoreboard nearby with these markers set next to it. Then each player picks a color and collects the 6 matching tribe members and 3 huts. In this video, we'll set up a game for 3 players, returning all of the other pieces back to the box. These tribe pieces are also known as Meeples. It's a shorthanded way of saying my peoples. Put that together and you've got Meeples. Every player now sets one of their meeple pieces onto the 0 space of the scoreboard. You'll also have some tiles with a 50 on one side and 100 on the other, which you can set aside for now. And then finally, you'll pick a person at the table to be the first player. And that's the setup. In Carcassonne Hunters and Gatherers, players will be drawing and placing tiles, creating a shared and expanding world in front of them full of rivers, lakes, forest, and prehistoric creatures. And as you do this, you'll each be adding your meeples to take control of the various landscapes in an effort to gain the most points by the end of the game. The game is played over a series of turns, starting with the first player and then going clockwise around and around the table. And on your turn, you'll perform up to 3 steps. So let's go back to the table and learn what those are. First, you draw and reveal 1 land tile from any of the regular face-down stacks, and then you attach it to the current landscape, which at the beginning of the game is made up of just the starting tile. Each tile has various landscape features, like grasslands, forests, lakes, and rivers. You may also see fish in the lakes or rivers and other animals roaming around, as well as these menhirs. For now, we'll focus on the landscape features and ignore any animals or menhirs. I'll also point out that when you're looking at a lake, it will always have at least 1 river coming out of it. So, although this lake takes up most of the tile, this little section is the river, and that's its own feature. That means that here we have a lake and 3 separate river sections. With that understood, after drawing a new tile, as mentioned, you must attach it to the current landscape, which means putting at least one of its sides against another full side of a tile already in play, so that all of the touching artwork matches. This tile, for example, shows a river with grasslands on either side. So I could place it like this, connecting to this river, or like this, grass to grass. Now, as long as you're matching the edges, a tile can be rotated in any way. But I couldn't, for example, place it this way or this way because now the art doesn't match. I have a river going straight into grasslands. Oh, and you can't place a tile so that only its corners are touching. It must always touch on at least 1 full side. As players continue taking turns, more and more tiles will get added, and each one can be attached to any valid edge. Again, as long as all the sides that touch another tile match like this. So on your turn, you first draw 1 tile and then attach it to the current ones in play. You then have the option of placing either a single meeple or hut from your supply onto the tile you just placed. Now, you don't have to do this, but if you do, you must put your piece onto the tile that you just added. You can never place it on any other tile. For example, after adding this tile, I couldn't place my meeple on the one here. Also, when placed, you must pick a specific feature from the tile for your piece to go on. Now, I had said earlier that you can add meeples or huts to tiles. But for now, let's just look at all the ways to place a Meeple tribe member, and we'll learn more about huts later. As mentioned, tiles will be made up of some combination of rivers, lakes, forests, and grasslands. Now you may see other artwork as well, but your meeples can't be placed specifically on them. For example, this is a menhir, and we also see a deer lying in the grass. But your meeples shouldn't be placed to cover those up. Depending on where you set your meeple, it will become different things. If you put it on a river, it becomes a fisher. If you put it on a forest, it becomes a gatherer. On grasslands, lay it down to show that it's a hunter sneaking through the grass for its prey. And it's important to realize that grasslands are divided by the forests and rivers that run through them. So this tile actually has two separate grassland features, one here and one here. And so it matters which one of them you're assigning your meeple to. Another important thing to realize is you may never place a meeple onto a river, forest, or grasslands that connects to the same feature that already has a meeple, even one of your own. In other words, if I had placed this tile on my turn and put a meeple here into the river, then the next player on their turn, after adding, say, this tile, could not put a meeple on its river as it connects to a river I'm already on. Instead, if they wanted to place a piece, it would need to go here or here. Even as this river grows, my fisher back here still blocks all others from going onto it. And now a hunter can't even be placed here because this grasslands connects to one that already has a meeple on it. Instead, this player, if they wanted to put their meeple somewhere, would have to go into this separate grasslands. Now, if this tile was placed, a meeple could be put onto the river because this is a new separate river from this one. Now, all that said, there is a sneaky way you can get your meeples into a feature someone else has already claimed. Let's say it was later in the game and we had a situation like this where blue is controlling this river and purple is controlling this one. Now, if a tile was put here, these two rivers have been joined into a single one, and that means two meeples will be sharing the same river. When a connection happens this way, that's okay, and it can be a good strategy to do this, as we'll see later. You can also use this method to get a meeple into another player's forest, like we see here, or even to join up separate grasslands like we're doing here. So let's recap quickly. On your turn, you must draw a tile from a stack and then place it into the growing landscape. And then you may put a meeple on that tile specifically. Then finally, you must score any features that were completed by the tile you just placed. Let's start with rivers. When you place a tile so that both ends of the river are closed by lakes or forests, it's scored. It will also be scored if a tile is placed so that the river loops back on itself. It doesn't matter who completed the river, just who has their meeple on it. So in this case, even if purple placed this tile and then added one of their meeples to it, blue will get the points because they have their meeple on the completed river. They then get 1 point per tile that makes up the river, plus one more for each fish that's present in the river and any lakes on either end of it. So in this case, blue would get 1, 2, 3, 4 points for the tiles and 1, 2, 3 more points for the fish for a total of 7. You mark your score by moving your token on the score track the related number of spaces. And as you play, if you ever go past 50 points, keep a record of that by collecting one of these tiles, and then keep going around the track again. Now, if you loop once more, flip that token over to show that you've now banked 100 points, and then keep going. After a river is scored, the player takes back their meeple, and this is important because when you place a meeple, you can never take it back until the feature it is in is completed and scored. You can, however, sometimes place and score a feature all in the same turn. For example, when placing this tile, I could put it here, then place my meeple onto this river section of it, and because this river is complete, immediately score it. In this case, I get 1, 2 points for the tile and 2 more for the fish. Then I immediately collect my meeple back. Just keep in mind, you can't then place a meeple after you've scored a feature. So purple couldn't, for example, then place a meeple onto this section of the river. So a turn goes in this exact order. First, draw and place a tile. Then place a piece onto it if you can or want to. And then do any scoring if necessary. After that, the next player would take their turn. Now, in very rare cases, it is possible you'll draw a tile that just can't be placed anywhere legally. If so, discard it back to the box and then draw a new tile until you get one that you can place. Okay, so we've gone over the steps of a turn and explained rivers. But now let's look at some of the other features like forests. To score a forest, it must be surrounded by grasslands on all sides and have no internal gaps. Here's an example of a forest with a gap. So until a piece is here, this forest will not be finished, and this could be tricky as the piece would have to match perfectly on all four sides. Here's an example where placing a tile would complete a forest. The player with a meeple there scores 2 points for each tile that makes up the forest. So in this case, 2, 4, 6, 8 points would go to blue. Now, no matter who scored, the person who placed the tile that completed the forest now checks to see if there are any number of menhirs in it. If so, that player gets 1 extra turn. So let's say the purple player put this tile here. Even though blue scores the points for this forest, purple gets an extra turn because they completed it and there's a menhir here. There's 2 actually, but that doesn't matter. You still only get 1 extra turn. This extra turn happens only after the forest has been scored and any meeples on it have been taken back. Then the player gaining the extra turn, purple in this case, draws the top tile from the set-aside menhir stack and places it, adding a piece to it if they like, and then scoring any features that might complete. If placing this bonus tile completes another forest with a menhir, you don't get another extra turn. At most, a player can only get 1 extra turn per turn. Tiles from the menhir's stack will often have more scoring opportunities. For example, this one has 2 separate lakes, each with 2 fish. This one has 2 valuable animals that we'll learn more about later. Some will even provide special bonus effects or scoring opportunities at the end of the game. We'll talk more about these special tiles a little bit later. Once the stack of menhirs is empty, no more extra turns are gained for the rest of the game. And that's how forests are scored. And again, remember, like rivers, after they're scored, the meeples on them are collected. Now, earlier we said it's possible for players to have their meeples on the same rivers, forests, or grasslands if they can sneak their way in. You can even get several of your own meeples into the same area this way. But when scoring, the player with the most meeples on the completed feature gets all the points. So let's say we completed a forest like this. It's worth 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 points. And because blue has more meeples in it than yellow does, blue gets all 14 of those points and yellow gets nothing. If there had been a tie for meeples, then the tied players all get the full amount of points. So here, blue and yellow would both get 14. Multiple meeples can also sneak their way into grasslands, but we haven't discussed how grasslands are scored, so let's do that now. Hunters in grasslands are unique because they aren't scored until the very end of the game. So keep in mind, when you place a meeple as a hunter, you will not be getting it back. Now, grasslands that a meeple controls are all of the ones connected within the borders of rivers and forests that surround it. In other words, this hunter here would control all of these connected grasslands, but the grasslands here are separate, and so are these, and all of these little fragments that we see on the edges. This is important because, like rivers and forests, you can't have more than 1 hunter within the same grasslands, unless you sneak it in. Perhaps you might go here because grasslands, like other features, are not connected if they're only touching on the corners. But then later, you could place this piece to connect your meeple's land to another player's, joining them together. And again, unlike rivers and forests, grasslands are not scored until the very end of the game, and we'll see how that works later. So those are all the various ways to place tiles and meeples. However, players also have 3 huts. Let's see how those are used. When you add a tile with a river or lake to the table, you can place a hut onto either of those features. So, unlike meeples, huts can go directly on the lakes themselves. And you can also place a hut onto a river that already has a meeple on it. The only restriction is that no other huts can be on the same river system. A river system is made up of all the rivers connected to each other through lakes. So all the water we see here is one connected river system. If we had tiles like this here, they would be their own river system and could contain their own hut. Just like Meeples, you can sneak more than one hut into the same river system by joining ones that are separate together by clever placement of the tiles. And remember, huts can be placed on a river where a meeple is already present, yours or another player's, but not on the same tile as a meeple. So when I added this to the table, I could either place a hut or a meeple onto it, but not both. Huts aren't scored until the very end of the game, so when you place one, it will stay there until the end of the game. And those are all the ways that tiles and pieces can be placed. And turns will continue around and around the table until the end of the turn, where the very last regular tile has been placed, not counting menhir tiles. You may have some of these left over, and that's fine. The game still ends now. With the game over, you now remove all the pieces from the board except for hunters and huts. In other words, remove every meeple that is standing upright, which means you don't score any points for the incomplete forests and rivers they were standing in. Now the player with the most huts within each river system scores 1 point for every fish within that entire system. So here yellow has 2 huts within the system and purple only has 1, so yellow will score the points. If more than one player is tied for the most huts within the system, they each get the total value in fish added to their score. Hunters now score points based on the prey found within the grasslands that they control. As you're reminded of here on the scoreboard, mammoths are worth 3 points each, aurochs are worth 2 points, and deer are worth 1 point each. So looking in this grasslands area, the yellow hunter here would score 3 plus 2 points for a total of 5. However, beware any saber-toothed tigers within your grasslands. For each one, you ignore 1 deer on your grasslands that you would have scored. The tigers got to them first. And to help with this, you can place these tokens on each pair of saber-tooth and deer symbols you find within the same grasslands. And don't worry, you don't lose any extra points if you have more saber-toothed tigers than deer for them to feed on. In this case, however, our grasslands extends all the way through here, so this tiger has found another deer. And so, in a case like this, after accounting for the tigers, this blue hunter would score 2 points for each of these aurochs and 1 point for the remaining deer. As usual, if more than one player had managed to get within the same grasslands during the game, only the one with the most meeples there would get the points. And if players are tied for the most hunters in a grasslands, they each get the full points of that area. Either way, after the scoring is complete, whoever has the most points wins. And in the case of a tie, the tied players share the victory. Now don't forget, I mentioned that certain menhir tiles will reward you with benefits right away when placed, or at the end of the game during final scoring. For example, you'll find pit traps that double your hunting scores, wildfires that can chase tigers away, a shaman who can return a meeple back to you early, and several other tiles. But I think the best way to learn these is to study their effects when they come up during your first play. And you'll find all of them explained very handily here on the back of the rulebook, so be sure to check there at that time. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Carcassonne, Hunters and Gatherers. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. But until next time, thanks for watching.